Hello, Wastelanders. As we all know, the Commonwealth is a battleground between powerful warring factions, clashing in violent displays of the considerable military resources at their command. Each faction can unleash devastating WMDs and field large forces in battle. And then there's the Railroad. Often derided as the worst faction in Fallout 4, many players only interact with the Railroad for the main storyline quests and then slaughter them in the service of the Brotherhood or the Institute. They barely have a visible presence in the Commonwealth. With no vertibirds, no relay grenades, no power armor, no flares, no artillery, no fast travel, no patrols, no checkpoints, it's easy to see why they are overlooked by players. And like many players, I haven't sided with them often. But in honor of Black History Month, I decided to give them an overhaul, and I realized that I have been missing out. Today, the Railroad becomes a faction you'd want to join. Let's jump into it. Starting with what matters most in any faction choice, are they cool? The passwords, the code names, the safe houses, the copious cigarettes, like a mix of the French Resistance, the Cold War CIA, and the Underground Railroad they take their name from. The Railroad is a clandestine network of spies, but because they dress like a bunch of scavvers and live in a drafty basement, they don't convey the sense of cool that a shadowy organization full of Cold War cool, smooth operators and fast-strike guerrilla fighters should. That all changes with Look at Me Railroad Edition by Sai, adding Railroad uniforms and handmaiden outfits to faction NPCs and bringing the Railroad from look at that manure to look at that man, noir. Allow our girl Harriet to show you what I mean. Give Harriet a round of applause for modeling just a few of the possible outfits for us, and let's head to the Railroad HQ to see Railroad Redone by X Freakish and Faction Housing Overhaul by Eleonora. If your faction has to operate out of an 18th century catacomb, give it a pulse. The vanilla Railroad HQ looked underdeveloped and about as well established as most raider camps, but as you will see, it looks lived in now. Eleonora gives us personal quarters to die for, as always, with all the touches we've come to expect, including posters of inspiring and idealistic emancipators like Abraham Lincoln, Harriet Tubman, and John Brown. Thoughtful touches to remind railroad operatives that it doesn't have to be February to acknowledge the importance of the right and the fight to be free. In the bathroom is another thoughtful touch, a mirror that can access the player looks menu for changing up your appearance on the fly like the slippery spy you are. And can we all agree that the ever noirish Nick is looking so right in his new trench coat?
Clothes make the man and all that.
Let's peruse a Railroad HQ that has come alive with many more amenities. Gone are the Spartan days of open stone caskets and a few empty shelves. What we have now is a proper hub, with resources, living quarters, and hardware that looks as if it could properly support the efforts of our faction. Unique NPCs get the suave outfits and custom quarters, but generic members also get a bump with railroad uniforms, light for operatives and dark for heavies, better quarters, and some major computing upgrades for our calculating coworker, Pam. While Harriet shows you around, let's talk about what you can't see. Some performance upgrades to the faction provided by Improved Railroad by Warsaw. We're talking about things like new NPCs that add a conductor, a porter, a foreman, and a pointsman to the different leveled lists of the railroad. There are also legendary NPCs now in the railroad faction, including Glory, who gets better stats, levels with the player, and is a real synth with an actual synth component. Speaking of which, Other Gen 3 synths can now appear as railroad agents randomly, so that Glory isn't the only synth that seems to have joined the faction that freed her. Makes sense to me, right? It also makes sense that assault rifles and combat rifles go into the leveled lists and outgo the old pipe guns, and also the Gauss rifles are replaced with railway rifles. It's just on theme, don't you think? Also, faction NPC perks have been added back in. That means that as you progress through the faction's quest line, completing something like the nuclear option unlocks a chance to stagger. And we want to increase our chances of seeing the railroad out in the Commonwealth interacting too. So you're going to see more random encounters. You're going to see the railroad fighting some pretty strong raiders called the L and L Gang. This is a lore-friendly way to bring the railroad up onto the surface and have you bumping into them more often in the Commonwealth. By the way, if you beat the To the Mattresses quest line and defeat the L and L Gang, these random encounters will stop because that will just make sense. But it's just a really cool way to remedy the lack of railroad encounters in the Commonwealth and just get them involved up there. Make them feel like a real active faction. And in a subtle but on-theme move, we've included cool charisma clothes by Unholy Service Bound, which adds charisma buffs to the vanilla suits, dresses, and sunglasses because sharp-dressed agents always have more charisma. Just ask James Bond. And if you like the way things are shaping up at HQ, you will be happy to know that life is good for agents laying low at Railroad Hotspot Bunker Hill as well, thanks to Railroad Hideout Bunker Hill by the Black Illusion. This mod provides a soft landing for agents needing to crash for a while and lay low in a friendly area. The digs are downright posh by Apocalypse standards and especially helpful for survival players. The keys are located at Railroad HQ, so joining the faction is required. Moving on to another well-known railroad locale, we have Immersive Spectacle Island Mercer Safe House. While Harriet shows you the place, I'll explain that we made sure Mercer Safe House was on the island through the use of no random Mercer Safe House location, which is allowing us to select the setting of Mercer. Immersive Spectacle Island Mercer Safe House requires Transfer Settlements Shareable Settlement Blueprints by C. Dante, a brilliant mod that allows you to save and share settlements you have poured hours into. I didn't have all the mods required for this settlement build, so it came out incomplete, but was still a great help in fast-tracking an immersive safe house build for this railroad playthrough. And I had some fun throwing a few of my own touches into it to fill the spaces that didn't populate. I plan on copying blueprints from settlements of my own that I work really hard on so that I can at least carry them over into some of my other playthroughs and don't have to start from scratch every time. Transfer Settlements is a mod I can't recommend highly enough. Similarly, I had intended to use Switchboard by Eleonora to turn Switchboard into a settlement, but even though I tried to follow the install directions, the mod was buggy for me. I assume it was user error, so I've linked it in the description for those of you who want to try it. And now, Wastelanders, I have a question, and be honest, have you ever thought that the railroad signs were a bit, well, obvious? Glowing Railroad Signs Goggle Edition by Robotized fixes that. By making special railroad goggles sold by Tinker Tom, agents wearing the goggles will see glowing railroad signs that are hard to miss, but without the specialized eyewear, the signs are invisible. Much trickier, much cooler, and as a bonus, they double as Cappy glasses in Nuka World. Now let me introduce you to a lore-friendly solution to another railroad shortcoming as well. The Institute has relay teleportation, the Brotherhood has vertibirds, and now the railroad has a brand of fast travel with the Railroad Travel Agent by Elha. Simply call for the agent, and he will appear to guide you painlessly through even the most dangerous of areas. Your options are limited to routes he knows around Boston, but they are all helpful ones, and it is faster and easier than vertibird travel. It's very balanced, it's very lore-friendly for the railroad, and it feels like it should have been a part of the vanilla game all along.
You're a tour guide?
Tour guides? And I thought I heard everything.
I'd like to travel.
Your options include Diamond City, Bunker Hill, Good Neighbor, the Airport, Red Rocket, Railroad Headquarters, Jamaica Plain, Ticonderoga, Cambridge, Vault 81, and the Castle. Just a note, I haven't been to all those locations yet with this character, so potentially the travel agent could allow me to get to places he knows, even if I don't. Again, a balanced, lore-friendly aspect of this thoughtful mod. And one last interesting detail, he doesn't drop you off right where you would fast travel in, which could be an advantage or a disadvantage, kind of depending on the situation. Another possible shortcoming of the railroad is that it does lack power-armored NPCs, but by using Tumba Jumba's Synth Power Armor mod, you not only have a more challenging enemy in the Institute, you can integrate synth armor into the game on course or mini-bosses in places like Fort Hagen or the Boston Mayoral Shelter, But you can also find the conductor power armor in the Railroad HQ, a stolen set of synth diver armor that Tinker Tom has hotwired with Railroad tech. This seems as lore-friendly as it gets, with the Railroad using jury-rigged Institute tech when it can. Which brings us to another Institute mod that also affects the Railroad. Institute Technology Overhaul by Mikolov was featured in our Buff Your Institute video and adds many new Institute weapons with thoughtful balance and lore-friendly design, but it also makes available jury-rigged versions of Institute weapons for use by the Railroad at the jury-rigged weapons bench. The full mod introduces biometrics to Institute weapons and has an immersive system for Railroad agents looking to hack the enemy's superior tech. A very immersive and thoughtful mod for Institute or Railroad players. And the connection between Railroad and Institute brings me to our last mod, Subversion by Toro Montana. If you know of this mod, you won't be surprised to find it on this list, as it restructures the main storyline to allow for options that should have been vanilla, because they just make sense. Chief of which is the option as Father's successor to declare the synths go free, and avoid slaughtering the entire Institute as if that was the only way. There are added dialogue options to make peace with the Brotherhood in several ways, to save Glory and make her a companion, to take on Virgil as a super mutant companion or invite him back to the Institute as a human, to stage a coup in the Institute with the Minutemen. I don't want to spoil anything, but the list goes on. All of this is done in a surprisingly seamless way and fills in many holes left by the original storyline options. So now I want to talk about something that all these mods helped me to appreciate. The Railroad is freaking cool. Committing to the faction, where stealth is preferred over force, I finally got comfortable with the VATS and VATS crit system. I even took the Mysterious Stranger perk so I could strike out from the shadows like the subtle solo agent assassin I was meant to be. And all the quirky paranoid individuals within the Railroad make for an entertaining feel to their storyline missions that is missing with the other factions and that I really have come to appreciate. And speaking of their storyline missions, many of them have a ballsy stealth option like the one available to us in Rocket's Red Glare. This is so distinctive and immersive that I am very glad to have given this faction a little more attention. But with Subversion, I was able to attempt Railroad missions with an Institute twist, finally having a way to summon backup and misdirect the enemy with a little havoc while I silently stalked through the scene. This was highly satisfying, proving that it is a lot of fun to be the underestimated underdog the enemy doesn't see coming. Another thing the Railroad helped me lean into was traveling in proper noir detective style, an aesthetic best cultivated through the Railroad faction, and taking Diamond City's most effective detective Nick Valentine as my companion. By tapping more fully into this role, I was better able to appreciate the impressive depth and ambiance of what is arguably Fallout 4's best DLC, Far Harbor.
A young woman from the Commonwealth named Kasumi may have passed through here.
I have never been as compelled by the rich and moody stories of Far Harbor as I was on this playthrough with Nick and my Railroad identity. I was able to immerse myself in plot lines and choices that felt grounded in my character's core values and background. I highly recommend it.
I'm part of a group that helps synths. A railroad.
Really?
Far Harbor is a place that feels tailored for the Railroad faction, and Nick has a surprising number of connections not only to Far Harbor, but the Railroad faction as well.
There's only one synth with that kind of face and a mind of his own. And I only see him when I look in a mirror.
There was one more mod that I used here to up the immersive ante. Start Me Up Redux by Dashboardian and the Odd Little Turtle allows you to start and play through Fallout 4 with an origin story and core traits of your choosing. If you saw the live stream, you know that no more stuck as the sole survivor, I chose to begin the game as a railroad tourist at Bunker Hill with a finesse trait that lowered my regular attack damage but raised my crit rate, and a night person trait that raised my special stats at night but lowered them during the day, necessitating and augmenting the stealthy VAT style playthrough that I've done here. It's linked in the description below with the other mods, and I suggest you give it a shot. While I'm offering suggestions, Nick's quest is well suited to a stealth build. Getting in and out with his holotapes was a cinch that made it a pleasure to dive into the rich backstory told through a tapestry of tapes and tragedy that fit in perfect with the dead drops and chain-smoking disasters of the Railroad faction. Well, we've seen new buffs, new looks, new features, new weapons, new stories, new locations for the Freedom Fighters, and that about does it for our Railroad Renaissance here at the Game Plan. I hope some of the suggestions on offer here inspire you to go dark and make your next playthrough a noirish one, because fighting for freedoms is worth it, but no one said you can't look sharp doing it. If you've enjoyed the video, show it some love with a like, and if you haven't subscribed, subscribe because there are more to come. And before I sign off, it's February, so remember my railroad radicals. It's a great time to learn something new about Black history. Later, Raiders. I'll see you in the next one.